Okay.
On the evening of January 9th, 1997, police responded to the scene of a savage murder at a brothel in Queens, New York. The victim was the brothel owner, a notorious pimp known on the streets as Blackie.
He was duct taped around the head, the nose, the mouth.
Detectives zeroed in on the victim's 40-year-old ex-girlfriend, Sharon Mabry, as their main suspect. Mabry had been a madam and a prostitute at the brothel, but had also worked undercover as a police informant.
She has put herself in dangerous situations her entire life.
After hours of intense questioning, Sharon confessed to soliciting accomplices to carry out the botched robbery of her ex-boyfriend.
I wanted to get in and get the money that was owed to me.
But at the trial, she claimed her confession was falsely obtained through police brutality.
Cops started threatening me. They put a gun to my head. They made me make false statements.
She's a bit of a con artist. She tries to connive everybody that she dealt with.
Was Sharon Mabry the mastermind behind the killing of her pimp and ex-lover? Or did she take the fall for a crime she did not commit?
Oh, welcome to the Gilchrist experience. Sharon's a little tardy. She's probably in the ladies' room. But, you know, we're live from Manhattan Neighborhood Network, and the show must go on. But we have another friend of mine,
Wesley Caines.
Wesley Caines, who spent 24 years in prison. My daughter's old friend, and we went to see him often in prison. And he's out. He was on the show last, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
2 years ago. And I think we had him in the first week you were out.
Yeah, it was
right?
definitely within 2 weeks.
Within 2 weeks of you being released, right? And you're back now 2 years later, a success story. You know, tell us how life is after spending all that time. And you're a young man, look at you, you look, what, 30 now? So you went in at 6? Come on, man.
Yeah, that's what I tell everyone. I mean, it's great being back. It's great seeing you gentlemen again.
Good to see you.
When I first came in, you know, a couple of weeks after being home after so long, I really didn't know what life really had for me. I knew what my goals were.
Mm-hmm.
I knew what preparations I had taken in preparing for my release.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, my wildest dreams could not have imagined where I am today and what I'm doing and what I aspire to do in the future. It's been, I mean, currently I'm working at Brooklyn Defender Services as a reentry advocate and specialist. I helped to create a program, a reentry program for the organization. And Brooklyn Defender Services, for those who don't know, is a public defender law firm in Brooklyn, New York, which represents, you know, 45,000 indigent clients each year. So there are a lot of men and women, poor men and women, mostly of color, who come through our doors. And part of what's so great about working for Brooklyn Defenders is because our executive director, Lisa Shriversdorf, and the staff of senior attorneys and social workers recognized early that for the people who came through our doors with a criminal matter, there was so much more going on in their lives that required addressing in that, you know.
Let's go to a roll-in, and we'll come right back. Give us a second roll-in, we'll come right back.
Okay.
Some of you thinks that.
I come from a Christian background. They were very strict in raising us to abide by Bible principles.
Sharon Regina Mabry grew up in a middle-class community on Detroit's west side with 2 younger brothers and a mother who was a devout Jehovah's Witness.
Sharon was so smart, and I had high hopes for her. She decided that she would like to be in missionary work, and she started off real good doing that for a while.
But as the young teen grew older, she rebelled against her religious upbringing.
My mother couldn't control me as a teenager.
She wanted to try what the world had to offer.
I started looking at the subliminal messages I was getting from the TV, glorifying prostitution and drugs, and I thought that was a way to make a life for myself.
By the time she graduated from high school, Sharon was already committing crimes.
And I just picked up on different angles of hustling, shoplifting, credit card fraud, and eventually I wound up working in a massage parlor as a masseuse, and that's when I really got into the world of prostitution.
By the time she was 17, she was working for a pimp in Detroit.
I was fascinated. He showed me closets full of furs and women with cars, and they had a lot of jewelry, but I liked to work for him and make money. You know, I was making $2,000 to $3,000 a week at 18 years old. It's a lot of money for a young girl.
While working in the sex trade, Sharon was offered drugs by her pimp. She soon developed a cocaine addiction.
My drug habit escalated to every day and all day.
Sharon's mother worried about the type of men in her daughter's life.
She was gullible as far as relationships were concerned. As a woman, we always look for someone to love us, but she was looking in the wrong places.
In 1982, Sharon met 34-year-old Dennis Levy. They married and moved to New York, where Levy devised a plan to help her create income selling herself for sex.
He said that I no longer could make any money in Detroit as a prostitute, and he would bring me to New York, show me how it was done and how I could make a lot more money.
After 4 years, Sharon left her husband to run her own escort service. By 1986, she had ascended into the top tiers of the underground sex trade in New York.
Sharon was working as a madam, and she was operating out of an apartment in the area known as West Harlem, New York.
I was dating another guy at that particular time, and he was into the pornography business.
According to court documents, on December 14, 1986, Mabry and her boyfriend committed a brutal assault on a 23-year-old woman named Lisa Dickerson.
Lisa was tied to a bed and tortured for quite a considerable period. She was tortured with a blowtorch, with cigarette lighters, razors. It was a real sadomasochistic type experience.
Sharon insists it was her boyfriend who tortured the girl and that she never took part in the crime.
At the time that the sexual assault was going on, I was out cold in the other part of the apartment on drugs. I never even knew she was there.
When the boyfriend left their apartment, Lisa tried to escape.
She's able to call 911, saying that she's been tortured, she's a kidnap victim. The police show up at the apartment. Sharon is so intoxicated that she forgets Lisa is actually tied up in the bed.
Sharon Mabry pled guilty to kidnapping in the 2nd degree and served 5 years in prison. She claims she refused to testify against her boyfriend because his family threatened her. He was never charged. In 1992, Mabry was released on parole.
Division of Parole was making a deal with me to go back in the streets. They needed information.
She knew the ins and outs of the flesh trade.
Stephen Ippolito was Sharon's parole officer, and he set the ground rules for her stint as an informant.
We didn't ask her to go into prostitution. We asked her to give us information.
I had to not only report to parole, I also had an FBI agent that I was reporting to.
Most of her information that she gave us had to do with prostitution and organized crime figures and some official corruption. She could move with fluency throughout the whole of the underworld.
It was in this underworld of crime that Sharon met Herbert Horton in 1993.
He had been considered a local pimp in the area.
He had a brothel, one of the most notorious ones in Queens County at that time.
He was known on the street as Blackie.
We became romantically involved, and I started running his place, getting him different girls.
According to Sharon, she was the madam of the brothel, but also worked as a prostitute.
If we didn't have a lot of girls that day to work, I would fill in quite naturally.
Welcome back. We have Sharon here. That's quite a story. I mean, we're looking at your past 25 years ago. How does it feel to review all this? Have you redeemed yourself? You spent some time, 20 years in prison, and now you're out doing wonderful things. But to take a look at your past so we can reveal to other young girls that have gone through this or going through this now. When they see this and see you now, they see two different people, and so do we here.
Well, I can just say that, you know, I started in hustling and being involved with criminality at a very young age. I was a sex trafficking victim at 13, and from that, it evolved into many different levels of hustling, prostitution, and eventually running an operation of escort services, and then evolving to a madam. If I could do it over again, would I? Absolutely. I spent 2 state bids in prison before I got it right. I was clueless. I didn't have any good role models in my life. I grew up in the era of the civil rights movement and swore to myself in the beginning of that era and all the things that were taking place against black people in Detroit, Michigan, that I would never ever be poor and never have the things that I wanted in life. Wrong mindset, wrong way of thinking. However, that's how I started my life, and that caused me a lot of problems. And with drug addiction.
Well, drug addiction is the main thing.
Right. It masked the pain of me doing something that was totally alien to how I was brought up. I was brought up in a Christian home.
Right.
Spirituality was a very strong place there, and I rebelled against that and went into the world to make a life for myself. Materialistic. I was attracted to I was wearing, you know, furs and diamonds at 14 years of age. You know, that's a very, very, very tough thing to overcome. It took me 35 years to overcome that and try to live a simple life. So, you know, what I began to realize after doing 6 years on the first state bid from 87 to 92, I really didn't think I would return. However, with parole being involved in my life, parole wanting me back on the streets for their own personal agenda, I became involved with criminality again at some of the highest levels I had been involved in.
They let you out on parole.
Yes,
so
I was granted parole. Well, I was granted parole. Well, I was granted parole because it was time for me to be released. You know, the parole officer had my jacket and my dossier file, and it revealed that I had had connections with high-powered people, politicians, organized crime, and they, for their own personal agenda, wanted to use that information to do whatever they needed to do. I, being naive and thinking that if I helped them with what they were trying to do, I would be able to be released. I owed a significant amount of time on parole, which was 12 to 13 years. And of course,
oh, really?
But of course, at that particular time, no one wants to be on parole at that particular time. They promised to let me off if I gave them substantial information that would lead to convictions of parolees that were involved in high levels of criminal activity, local politicians, and organized crime. That information never went anywhere because I never gave anything. I never trusted them. I never gave them anything that would make those type of arrests. So at that particular time, I made a deal with the Division of Parole that if they did not release me off of parole, that I was going to go to the New York Times. And when I made that threat is when it spiraled into the murder that was framed for and did 20 years for.
For the murder of Blackie?
Yes, that is correct.
Hmm?
At such a young age, getting involved in the sex trade, you know, we see here in New York on Channel 7, you know, children are missing every day, children have disappeared. Do you believe that some of these children that are missing have gone into or been swept into the sex trade through one interaction or another? Some of these children that are missing.
Well, absolutely. At 13, I was a sex trafficking victim. You know, absolutely. And they're even younger every day. So realizing that and looking back at my life, I began to create workshops that would help young women and target these women. I saw women coming into Rikers Island when I did my 4 years there on this last bit of 19 years. And I saw, it was me all over again. I didn't want them to have to deal with
Now, at that particular time, which was a wrongful arrest and prosecution, that wound up being a wrongful conviction, I really didn't want them to have to go through the things that I went through. I was saddened by what I saw, and that put me in position to create workshops because of my own experiences. So I created a workshop for sex trafficking victims and teenage prostitutes. I have offered that workshop to the Caines District Attorney's Office, Bondas, Seward, and Kenneth Thompson, because some of the big problems of prostitution with young girls are in Brooklyn and Queens.
Today?
Oh, yes.
Today.
Yeah.
Okay.
On the edge of East New York, Canarsie.
Yes.
There are operations running there. That hotel on the
all over.
Flatlands.
It's all over.
Yeah.
So my thing was, when I saw them come into the system and get stuck in the system just like I was to try to build their self-esteem up, to make them realize that they were worthy, you know, they mean something, you know. Try to get an education. Yeah, I had dipped and dabbed with college, but try to get an education, because it really makes you understand why you are the way you are, and how you can change to be a better person and a better woman, and how you can impact. Women are very powerful. They have a lot to contribute to mankind, and I feel as though they could definitely benefit mankind and society.
You've got to bring in the factor of drugs.
Absolutely.
All
Well,
right?
drugs
there's the main problem.
Well, drugs.
This has always been our problem as a race of people. I mean, back in my day in the 50s, it was booze, and you prove your manhood by how much booze you could hold. And that was a legal drug, but yet it was a genocidal drug. And the true genocidal drug was crack. Now, tell us your experience with crack.
Well, let me just say, my experience was with crack. Before it was crack, it was cocaine, and it was cooked cocaine, and I experienced that at a very young age. I really didn't have a bad habit at that age, but I did use. And I believe that women.
Now, what year are we talking?
We're talking the early 70s.
70s.
Right. I believe that women use those type of drugs to mask the pain. To mask the trauma, to mask the pain of being with men, to, you know, doing something that's very alien to what they should be really doing in life.
Well, the 70s in New York was Sodom and Gomorrah anyway.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
God.
Well, I didn't come to the 80s, but it was still Sodom and Gomorrah when I came. I was working for Sydney Biddle Burroughs, the Mayflower Madam, when I first came to New York, which I got most of my clientele from her. So, absolutely. Absolutely. It was just,
what year did you come to New York?
I came to New York in 1982.
82. All right, so you didn't witness the 70s in New York. Okay. Well, 82, crack was prevalent. That was really getting strong here.
Yeah.
What about AIDS?
Detroit,
that was the beginning of AIDS, too.
Yeah, well, Detroit, I was introduced to that drug in Detroit, Michigan. And I feel as though New York got it last. And, you know, California was really on the forefront of smoking the cocaine.
Okay.
Detroit, in the early 70s, I was already smoking cocaine once or twice a month. You know, me and my girlfriends were making like $5,000 to $10,000 a week. We put money in a big kitty, and we would just go out and just smoke cocaine all night long, and have guys and just, you know, do the things that comes along with that business. So, looking back at all that, you know, am I regret?
The 80s, a decade of greed and.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. By the time I got to New York in 1982, I was gone. You know what I'm saying? Like I said, my first person I worked for was Sydney Biddle Burroughs, the Mayflower Madam. So, and I came away with a high-end clientele that helped me, you know, spearhead my escort service. So, and
so with that kind of money, I mean, that more or less encourages people, doesn't it?
Oh, it takes a long time to get your mindset. I had to decode myself. I mean, I really had to. When you're used to expensive things and expensive lifestyle, you know, it's very hard to just get away from that. Prison had a lot to do with that, because then I go from $10,000 a week to $6 every 2 weeks. So what do? I come from a poor family. They're dirt poor. You know, they couldn't afford to sustain me while I was in prison, you know. Some hustles I did pick up in prison wasn't prostitution, but, you know, prison presents its own set of hustles. You know, I was a jailhouse lawyer for many, many years, and that was my hustle to sustain my base while I was there.
What got you away from all this? Being thrown in jail after the
Well, I guess
after Blackie.
Yeah, well, the wrongful conviction, even though is traumatic.
Well, you feel you got what you reap what you sowed?
I don't know if I would say that. I think it made me a better woman. I don't think I would have accomplished the things I have accomplished thus far in life had I not been in prison. Prison saved my life.
Okay, all right.
Is your mother still living?
Yes, I just saw her a couple weeks ago, actually.
So the two of you have come back together?
Yes. I made amends with her. I've been a very disappointing daughter to her. I hope to stabilize her situation in Detroit, because you know Detroit is in a bad way right now, and to buy some real estate, uproot her, and take it so she can live out the rest of her days at ease, knowing that her daughter is fine and doing the best that she can, and creating something for society and making an impact for young girls. And that's what I do. I live around a bunch of young girls out at the Fortune Society, and they're damaged goods. You know what I'm saying? But I try to reach out to them. I try to show them the DVD, the story of my case, because there's only 3 ways out of here. 2 ways out. It's either prison, death, or you lose your mind. And I'm very fortunate, and I thank God, and I kiss the ground every day to be free, and to have a second chance in life to try to, put things back in order and to make some type of impact in society. To save one girl's life will be a tremendous, great stride for me at this point.
So what would you say to a young lady listening right now? Because a lot of times, back in the 60s, we had the heroin epidemic, and now there's a quasi-heroin epidemic in the suburbs. But we looked at situations and we said, well, I'm not going to be like, I'm going to do this. People said, I'm going to do this. I'm going to dabble with this, dabble with that, but I can control it. And young girls are watching. They're hearing your story. What can you tell them to be cautious of in terms of what a guy says to them, how a guy speaks to them, because to let them know that it's a trap, it's a snare, and it will get them just the way it got you, but they don't have to experience what you experienced. What would you tell them to be careful of, to look out for?
Well, I think, for me, looking back at my lifestyle, you got to have somebody that cares and loves you, first of all. And when you have, this is why we have the gang violence that's going on, because people are looking for role models, they're looking for mentors, they're looking for people to say, hey, I care about you. I love you. You see what happened to me? I don't want to ever see that happen to you. And this is what the workshop I have in place, STARS, this is what it promotes: self-esteem, cognitive thinking, to change the way they think. It's all here. It's all here. So I hope, and I have made some impact on some lives. I hope that they can just come away looking at my story, and I'm providing a different service now than I did before, to just say that, hey, she made it, I can make it. I don't need to go through that. Education is a very big key. And with that, wisdom and knowledge, you know how to do better.
Well, you have a success story right next to you, Wesley Caines.
Yes, I heard that. Yeah, I heard that.
I mean, he keeps saying that. I'm not exactly sure that. I think I'm still progressing. I'm still moving forward. I think that if I buy into those words, that means that I'm where I'm going to be, and there's no other aspirations that I can have.
Well, she just got out in January.
Yes.
He's been out 2 years after 24 years.
Yes.
And I feel great.
Years.
Yes.
And I feel great.
Yes.
I feel great. Well, I got 19, so 19, 24 is all relative to what? It's a lot of time in prison.
Yeah. I can hear your passion, and I think there's something that Winston and Graham really don't understand about people who have been in a cage for decades. And had the opportunity to transform our lives and the passion with which we bring to what it is we're looking to do.
Yeah.
And I was sitting here listening to you, and I was hearing all of your words, and it was just like reverberating in me, the trauma and the idea that drug plays such a big role, but it's more than drugs. It's our culture. It's our culture sending mixed messages. It's defective institutions in our communities. It's that schools fail, and maybe parents were not well equipped to be parents. And because school fail, and because the police department interacts with a certain community in a particular way, there is no room for mistakes. So there are consequences that goes, I think, way too far. I think there's over-criminalization. So I think that a lot of the things that you're talking about, why I don't like to reduce it to simply being a drug issue, is because then it miss all of the other opportunities in our culture that we need to do better.
And you're absolutely right. You know, it's one thing that I spoke to Winston about is my behavior was criminalized.
Okay.
Exactly.
It wasn't because I committed a crime.
That's what I meant by reap what you sow.
Right. It wasn't that I committed a crime. They know I didn't commit the crime. It's because who I was and what I represented in society. How dare you darken the door of the criminal justice system with a Thelma and Louise type of personality. You're supposed to be in the kitchen barefoot and pregnant. This is what you're supposed to do, and this is what our patriarchal system is based on. And the women that sit on the bench of our courts have the same mindset. They're even worse. So I find, and I've seen, and I've experienced, the people that actually killed my business partner and lover in this, you know what they got? They got 10 years flat. So my lawyer argued straight up, how is it that you convict her for acting in concert, not even being around the crime, and her co-defendants that you say are her co-defendants get 10 years flat, and she gets 20 years to life because my behavior was criminalized, and I had came within the system and the lifestyle. The jury couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe it.
Now let me ask you, did your co-defendants go to trial?
No, they took a plea.
And that's an important thing.
Yeah.
That's a very, very important thing that we really need to talk about.
You had that up.
Yes, the idea that you are punished for exercising
You're right.
your right to a trial.
Right.
So the system operates.
Tell us about your situation.
Well, my current position is at a law firm, public defender law firm, as I was saying before. It's interesting. Live TV is like a metaphor for life. Things happen, you just have to kind of roll with it. But I was saying before is that I work now for Brooklyn Defenders, having created a reentry program for the organization.
Okay.
But prior to that, in my past, I had been convicted, acted in concert as well, of taking the life of a young man in the community where I grew up and received a sentence of 25 years to life. I was the only actor in the scenario to be arrested and charged for the crime. And it was understood by the detectives and the district attorney's office that I had not been the trigger person. This was not a premeditated action. This was a spontaneous action between one of my co-defendants and individuals he had previous interactions with.
Right. Okay.
They fled. I stayed, not at the scene, but fled in the sense of the jurisdiction, and I was arrested.
You were the driver?
You
were the driver?
Correct. They were in my car. They got to the scene of the crime in my vehicle and left the scene of the crime in my vehicle.
Okay.
And I mean, it's important. I don't make the claim that Sharon makes. I don't make the claim of actual innocence. I think that there is room for my culpability in what took place. And I think that any right-thinking individual looking at the scenario would have said you had opportunities in front of you to do certain things, to do certain good things, and you did not. I could have gone to the police precinct. I did not. I could have responded to them when they reached out to me asking about the incident. I did not. And I took the position that it was not my responsibility or duty to cooperate with the police or the district attorney's office in apprehending my co-defendants.
Don't snitch.
Exactly.
Okay.
And regardless of how you feel about all of those positions that I take, I have a particular view on them. It's not my best moment in life. It's not what I would like to be moving forward remembered for. So I understand the idea that having not been involved in this crime and being tried and exerting your right to a trial, that you were punished for that, and that the actual actors who were involved got a more lenient sentence than you who were not involved. The system operates on plea bargaining.
Okay.
So it has to make an example of anyone who exert their right to a trial.
And if you had a plea bargain, how much time do you figure you would have gotten?
Well, I was offered a 6 to 18 if I cooperated with the district attorney.
6 to 18?
6 to 18 years.
And you might have spent, what, 10 in there?
As little as 6 years, as maximum of 12, based on how the sentencing structure is in New York State. So I could have been out of prison in 6 years had I cooperated. Not wishing to cooperate and taking my case to trial resulted in me getting 25 years to life. So the system does that to send a message to everyone else.
So they punish you because you went to trial?
Yeah, they punish me, but also it's about sending a message.
Okay.
It's about saying to everyone else who's stuck in Rikers Island because their families can't afford to bail them out.
Okay.
It's about saying to other people who have a case who's coming before a judge or a jury anytime soon.
Sure.
This is what happens when you exercise your right to a trial.
That's true.
If you roll the dice and it comes up craps, we will bury you. Because this system needs to continue flowing, and the way that it flows, the grease that makes it flow, is plea bargainings.
Okay.
So you're minimizing harm to yourself, your family, and ultimately your community by being forced to take plea bargains. And again, this has nothing to do with guilt or innocence. We're not even having a discussion about guilt, innocence, and crime and punishment. We're having a discussion about how the system operates and how it forces people to not make decisions based on their guilt, innocence, and evidence that's held up against them, but making the decisions to take plea bargains based on least harmful outcomes for themselves.
And I want to chime in on that, and that is totally correct, because the day before the jury came back with the verdict, I had one of the best lawyers, an AT&B attorney, but I was sold out. I had 2 other women that were being represented by him, and I was sold out for them getting lesser sentences and passing it over where I got the larger sentence and I was the oldest. And he came and told me, he visited me the night before. He says, listen, let me tell you something, Sharon. Life is not fair. And I'm telling you right now, they're going to convict you. I screamed and kicked and said, hey, what about what the cops did to me? What about the cops putting a gun to my head and forcing me to make a statement that was coerced? What about that? Where does that go? Does that go out the window? You know what he said to me? I know they did that to you. However, we cannot prove it at this point, and I'm telling you, if you don't take this 6 years flat, they're going to convict you. You're going up north. So I got punished.
Why didn't you take the 6 years?
I wasn't guilty. I wasn't guilty. So you want me to go in there, and guess what? The 6 years flat would have been to criminal possessions of a weapon in the second and third degree. And guess what? That charge I was acquitted of. So now we look at, how do I get charged with felony murder, acting in concert on the only indictment by myself to murder without the weapon? So there's a lot
What happened to the twins?
One is still he's due out in 2022 because he had 5 other armed robbery cases. The other brother got out 10 years, in 2009. But what the most amazing thing that happened to me while I was in prison, and we all know with wrongful convictions, evidence doesn't come forth. You can start screaming and maintaining your innocence all day long. So people are not listening to you. The judge didn't care. He says, you played a role in those offenses, and this is what happened. So 3 women that were in the drug house with me, and it's ironic, the same scenario that played out in the last conviction in 87, knocked out on the couch on drugs. Here we go in 1997, knocked out on the couch on drugs as the murder was occurring. The 3 women that were, the women that were in the house with me came forth.
There were other women in the house?
Yes. There were other women in the house, came forth and signed sworn affidavits saying no alibi was ever presented for me. They said they couldn't produce one for me. I don't know why the jury went for that. I don't know why the judge went for that. I had an alibi. And they came forward and signed sworn affidavits that said, Sharon Mabry Gina was here with me on the date and time of the murder. I kept that evidence because everything I put before the courts, pro se, was knocked out. They didn't care. They didn't want to hear anything from me.
But didn't you set up the robbery?
Never did any of that. Never was there.
But you set that on the piece here.
I said that because, as I said, I had a cop that terrorized me for 12 hours and put the gun. And by the time you see that video, I'm already told what I have to say. So these are not examples of or incidents that have not been brought forth in the public's eye. We see all the wrongful convictions that happened in Kenneth Thompson's office. One lone detective took out over 200 arrests.
Yeah.
That's Louis Carcella. Detective Louis Carcella, who's retired now.
You know about this?
Yeah.
And also in my case. Now, many years later, so we find out the detective has been dirty in not only in my case, but in other cases, setting up, placing false evidence. I held on to that evidence because I knew that the judge I couldn't present it as being a poor woman, pro se, indigent going into the courts. So where I stand at now, we're going back into the courts. I was released from the parole board on my actual innocence claim. They couldn't believe that what had happened with me and all the involvement I had with my previous parole officer, that he involved me with criminality, which they felt as though got me back into hustling, and that somebody was wound up dead because of that. You know, so I had negligent parole supervision. I appeared before 3 parole boards. I had failing health at that time. And with those sworn affidavits that was in front of them, which the parole board is not supposed to relitigate anything, but I knew they was going to relitigate it, so I gave it to them. Okay. You're only an innocent, dying woman in jail for a crime you didn't get. I have served enough time. So their main thing was, we hope you get the justice that you deserve. And so that's where I'm at this point today.
You know, you mentioned pro se, and they really don't like people coming into court doing a pro se case. They want you to have an attorney because they're all attorneys. And there's a salary not being paid when you come in pro se. It is your right to do it, but they don't like to see you come in there pro se. And like you said, they threw everything that you had to say to the curb. I've done, I don't know how many trials in New York throughout my career. I'm thinking of a homicide case I did with a young fella, 17. And he was not the shooter. And at age 17, following trial, he got 17 years. He was not the shooter. And I told him, I said, even before, I said, look, I know that you didn't pull the trigger, but I do know that the two of you went there to do a robbery. And ironically, the guy that wound up killed was the guy that we were looking for another robbery. And that's, you know, talk about dramatic irony. And when I sat down with him, I said, I don't believe that you went there even intending to kill anybody. To do the robbery, yes, because he had some jewelry they wanted. And when they left, they didn't even take the jewelry. Because he was in such a state of shock that his friend pulled the gun and shot the guy. He didn't even know that the gun was coming into play until it did. And I knew that because I interviewed a woman who overheard their conversation as they were walking down the street. And this is part of the work that we do, but they were walking down the street and the woman was sitting in her window listening to their conversation as they went by. So when he knew that I knew the conversation, he was awestruck. I said, listen, I can't tell you how I know, but I do know. I said, but what I can do, I will do for you because you're not the shooter. But you were there to commit a robbery which escalated into a homicide. And I have no choice but to charge you in the homicide as well as the attempted robbery. He got 17 years in sentencing. The guy that did the shooting got away. And this was disturbing to me. I knew where the shooter went. I had information on what he did with the gun. But the only witness that could ID the guy was the co-defendant. They wouldn't take his statement because they wanted a corroborating statement from someone not involved in the crime, because the defense attorney will say, oh, he's just sticking it on my guy.
Right.
And the gentleman who knew where the gun had been brought was threatened by his own wife and daughter, who the daughter was the girlfriend of the shooter. And he told me, he said, I can't tell you, I've already told you what I can tell you, but I can't come to court and make that statement. He said, because my wife and daughter will kill me. So I had a 17-year-old kid who was involved in a robbery which escalated into a homicide. And he wound up going for the homicide, while the guy he was with, who committed the murder, walked.
How old were you when you went into prison?
I was arrested at 22. I was
22.
convicted at 24.
24.
Yeah.
So how do we...
May I just comment on something that
Sure.
Graham said about, you know, the irony of the victim in this particular case having been someone who was wanted? That's actually a very common thing in certain communities, where there's a fine line between victim and perpetrator, because today's victim is tomorrow's perpetrator and vice versa. So, I mean, oftentimes, you know, we walk into a situation or a community seeing simply black and white, good and evil, you know, victims and perpetrators, and sometimes it's not often that clear. And if our criminal justice system is going to evolve into something more equitable, I think that we need to have the capacity to look at people and not just look at numbers flowing past judges and courtroom houses and prison cells.
Your record was not a factor in court, was it? On the homicide?
It was used.
It's not supposed to be used.
Yeah, but it was.
But that's not right.
I had a parole officer that came, well, actually, the parole officer came and testified at my trial, and he said that he felt as though my boyfriend was involved with organized crime, and organized crime.
But that's prejudicial to the jury.
Absolutely, absolutely. My whole life, I said they criminalized my behavior.
They had no right to bring any past scenario. The only thing the judge could do, he could comment on it in sentencing and say, in light of your past history and blah, 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 I sentence you for this, but not for a jury to hear that information. That wasn't correct.
Everybody has to understand the criminal system, as Wesley has so amply told us, it's a setup. The idea is not to get involved with the criminal justice system.
Right.
It's to stop killing and shooting and getting involved in these incidents and get a good education so you don't wind up in prison. That's a place to avoid at all expenses. You know, we're here trying to keep people out of the criminal justice system because we know it's saying they're laying in the cut, waiting for the slightest thing to go do wrong. But you were in an environment where you were open to that kind of stuff. So you can't, anything that comes at you is just par for the course.
Absolutely.
Because you're in that industry. You're in doing something that is prone to, they're going to catch you in any way.
Yeah, it didn't matter. It didn't matter
what you did. And what's just is that you were involved in criminality and they're going to nail you for it, period.
I disagree.
You do?
Respectfully, I disagree.
Okay.
I think that our role as a society is to create circumstances for young people where criminality and the criminal justice system is not an option. I agree with you on that. I think that Sharon's lifestyle, although was criminal in nature, there's a difference between her being involved in a criminal lifestyle and having certain interactions with her peers that are unjust and saying, okay, well, you're in that arena, that's to be expected. And making that same statement in regards to the government. The government has a higher standard. The government doesn't have, I don't believe that this government is empowered to railroad its citizens. I don't think a district attorney's duty is to get convictions. It's to get justice. So when you say that her involvement in this lifestyle you know, it's a natural outgrowth that they were going to get her and they were going to lock her up because she was doing other crimes. No, you prove in a court of law her actions in those other crimes, and you convict her for that. You don't get to railroad someone on the theory that you know that they're doing bad things.
Right.
When you have government, you know, projecting its infinite wisdom onto individual citizens and then taking their liberty without proof, without due process, that's a problem. And that's a problem whether you are on the left or on the right. It should never be a situation where we accept a government that looks out upon the masses of its people and give favor to some groups over others. Government's duty is to keep a level playing field and to facilitate people thriving and being the best that they can be. It is not to select which amongst its citizens should be allowed to thrive and have a viable future at the expense of others.
But it happens every day.
But it happens every day, and I think a program like this is important, and talking about it is important, because I think that, and you and I have spoke over the years about this a lot, so I think you kind of understand, you know, a lot of my thought processes on this. I think that in the communities that we're speaking about, highly criminalized communities, communities of mostly color, we have to become more critical of our policymakers. First of all, we need to be engaged in the political process, number one. And once we are engaged in the process, we need to hold our policymakers up to a standard where they respond to our concerns and our needs.
Absolutely.
And until and unless we do that, then we're never going to get the government, which is made up of these policymakers, to be responsive to the things that are impacting our lives.
And you know what, that's true, because after so many years in prison, the state attorney general, after me appealing the parole denials on the basis that I didn't commit the crime, I was innocent, came back in his reply and said, yeah, she's in prison, but she's not in prison for committing an act of violence. She's in prison because she foresaw or foreseeing what was going to happen. Where do we get this? Nowhere in America can you get convicted on something you think or I thought was going to happen. So with all that in line, the parole commissioner's like, time out, she's out of here.
I want to show you this last piece. It's only 3 minutes long, Life After Prison. And we'll show a little bit about what you're doing now. All right? So let's run that last piece on life after prison.
Originally, I was born in Detroit, Michigan. In Michigan in the 60s and 70s, I believe they went through their own economic struggles. There was a lot of criminality, a lot of hustling, pickpocketing, shoplifting, and it was glamorized. I adopted that lifestyle, unfortunately, because there were not that many great role models for me to follow. And I asked this friend of the family I needed to find work. So he immediately introduced me to the prostitution business. On my first conviction, the case happened in 1986. I was given 8 years, parole, released in 1992. And immediately I got back involved with the sex for trade business on the suggestion of my parole officer, who I had somewhat of an affair with, and he allowed me to be involved with criminality for his own personal agenda. I was found guilty of felony murder, acting in concert with unknown people to commit the attempted robbery of my boyfriend that resulted in his murder. And I was granted release January 12, 2016. So I've only been home a little less than 90 days. I'm 60 years old now. I come to prison at 40. Housing has changed in the last 10 years. What I thought it was 15 years ago is not what it is now. We're in a great housing crisis, and we're not included, prisoners being released every day from state prisons in New York State are not included in that plan. It was already made before I went out. You can't leave prison without an address. So because I had disabilities and because they couldn't find me housing on a short-term basis, they wanted to put me in a shelter in Brooklyn, the women assessment shelter. That wasn't an option for me because of the cane and my disabilities. So parole was very good. They found me a 3-quarter house to go into. Very good for me, although I made it work. I got my ID, I rushed and got my ID. I knew I was having a housing crisis. I had issues with the owner. I had some issues there with the residents. But the main thing is I walked out of that gate. If I had to sleep in a tent, if that's what I had to do to make my way, then so be it. At least I wasn't locked up anymore.
So we're updated. Okay. This is today. And that's Fortune Society, which you're going at 6 o'clock, right?
Yes, there's a reception tonight. They're dedicating the library.
Okay. So, I think, Graham, with this, hear how you got off the drugs.
Yeah, you got off the cocaine how?
Well, I got off the cocaine, heroin, and anything else I was doing.
Prison.
Going to prison.
Okay, so there was...
And that's not to say the drugs were rampant.
There are drugs in prison.
There
I know
were
that
a
for
lot
a
of
fact
drugs in the maximum security prison
we've
of
arrested
Bedford
guys
Hills.
that have done that.
Right.
Guys on work release go out and buy the heroin and bring it back in, and they're working with state correction officers, all kinds of people. But you didn't get any treatment while you were out on the street. Did you ever seek to get into a program?
Yeah, I did, but you know, that's short-lived. I wanted to get back into the game. I wanted to make the money. I wanted to, you know.
Yeah, there's a backside to that question that I'm coming to. Right now with the heroin addiction, I did an article for one of the newspapers in New York about 6 years ago, and I had predicted that heroin was coming back and it was going to come back strong, and it's back. But it's in the suburbs. And recently there was a big conference in Nassau County because of the heroin influx in Nassau County and the overdoses. When our people were dying in great numbers from heroin and cocaine, there was no outcry, no big time outcry. And they don't want to criminalize the young kids in the suburbs for having heroin. They want them to get treatment. They don't feel they should be arrested and criminalized for their possession. And I find that to be
troubling.
A slap in the face for all of the people who went through the Rockefeller laws and all of those convictions. And now because white children are addicted to heroin as a result of the military operations of the U.S. in Afghanistan, by shutting down the Taliban in Afghanistan years ago and allowing the Northern Alliance to come back in and reintroduce the poppy fields to produce the heroin, which is what the U.S. did.
They never shut down.
When the Taliban took control, they shut down the heroin trade, and that had a big effect on a lot of finance and banking. When they ran the Taliban out, the heroin trade was reintroduced jointly with the Northern Alliance and the U.S. military. So heroin is back, and it's hitting suburban areas. But they don't feel that their children should be criminalized for their addiction because they need treatment. Quite unlike the way in which we dealt with the scenario back in the 60s through the 80s. But you couldn't get treatment. You kick cold turkey in prison?
Again, may I just reiterate, it was mindset. Once I stepped into Bedford Hills the second time for a crime I didn't commit the first one either, but definitely on a 19-year sentence, I was 40 years old then, I cried like a baby. So I got on my A game. I says, hey, I'm not going to, that's it. I'm done.
It's mental.
Yeah, so it's mindset.
And can I say something to that? I mean, I understand.
Well, you never had a drug problem, did you?
No, but I understand the difference in how the government is responding to who are addicted now. And we should be outraged by that. Right. And we should ask that those people who are incarcerated
Be released.
Because they
Let
had
'em out.
substance abuse issues, that their cases be revisited and they should be released. But make no mistakes, substance abuse is a public health issue.
Right.
Yeah.
And it should have been treated as such. And I don't begrudge that they are treating it as a public health issue in the suburbs now. I think, again, it goes back to holding our policymakers accountable to our community, that we ask that it's also held to a public health standard in our community as well, because it is a public health issue. You shouldn't be criminalized because you have a substance addiction.
Then what do we do with the pushers? What do we do with people moving the drugs
That's all
into the communities?
that was planned genocide.
Okay.
I think when you say pushers, it assumes that everyone who sells drugs have the same makeup and scope, which is not the case. So if I'm an addict and I'm selling,
I'm not talking about the addict, I'm talking about the pusher.
Oh, okay, so now pusher, as you're using it, is someone who's moving large quantities of drugs across state lines and distributing.
Oh, it doesn't have to be
communities.
across state lines, but they are selling in the community. They are selling.
You're killing the community.
Again, you have addicts who sell in the community. And I think I think that's where it requires that our policymakers and our law enforcement not be lazy and really looking at people and not just looking at numbers. Because we have to examine each individual to see whether or not they're addicts who are selling small quantities of drugs to feed that addiction, or are they someone who is in business moving drugs at quantities that are creating addicts in communities. Those are different scenarios for me.
Yeah, those are business. Those are business operators.
So I think the people who are in the business for the sake of business of drug dealing, the system should deal with them on a criminal justice level. I think the people who are dealing with dealing to support their habits on a smaller scale should be dealt with accordingly as a public health crisis, which it is.
Drugs, I feel that the dealer deserves really, he deserves to be put away. I mean, anybody that sells drugs that kill people, he deserves this sentence of death, really, because he's selling death. When you know you're giving dope to kids and they're killing themselves or killing other people for it, or selling crack, those are the real enemies in our community. The drug dealer on the corner that we praise and give praise to. This man is selling yourself and making $1 million off you killing yourself.
But not every drug dealer.
This is what the community should gang up on.
That's a generalization,
of course,
which doesn't take into account that person who's standing on the corner, as you described, selling poison, killing people in the community, but who at 5 years old was made to help his parents or her parents take seeds out of marijuana plants so that they can bag it up to sell. That person who at 9 years old was made to hold drugs by adults. So I think that we'll press on time, but I think it's more nuanced than simply saying lock away drug dealers.
Right, and I concur.
Yeah.
We're off the air?